how do we find the places, the spaces, the practices that help us source our own power, that help us fill ourselves up, nourish ourselves, care for ourselves and our communities, so that we can keep going with as much wellness as possible. Welcome. You are listening to Our Mindful Nature, formerly titled The Mindful Minute. I'm your host, Meryl Arnett. This podcast explores the deep connection between land and self through nature-based meditations and meditative experiences that invite us back into belonging to each other, to our ancestors, to the earth, and to all beings that make up this universe. If you would like to access these meditation practices as standalone audio files, please subscribe to my newsletter at merylarnett.com. It's free, and you'll receive a new mini meditation each week, along with behind-the-scenes content and bonus material for each podcast episode. All right, grab a cup of tea, pop in your headphones, and find a comfy seat. Let's settle in for today's episode. Welcome, my friends. Happy Monday. We are deep in our journey at this point, going through some witchy archetypes. And we have talked about the kitchen witch, we've talked about the earth or forest witch, and today we are going to be talking about the water witch and the swamp witch. Water witch is a really interesting term because it's used, all of these terms probably are, but this one in particular is used in some very different ways. And if you Google water witch, one of the first things that comes up is not really a woman in a pointy hat and broom type image, right? A water witch is often somebody who uses a divining rod to source water underground, right? So it's a divination technique, which is, a bit witchy, but it's like an actual real thing. There's countless stories of people in Appalachia, like all the little Appalachian mountain towns had a water witch, right? How else would you know where to dig your well? And it's not just Appalachia, it's across the world, across time. The first image dates back to 8,000 years ago in a cave in North Africa, right? There's a person holding a little Y-shaped stick, which is what they use. But for our purposes, because I doubt many of us are going to be divining for the location of a well, although you never know, I suppose that might be very useful one day. But for today, I think we will more likely be talking about the water witch as one who sources her power from water. From water, maybe from her relationship to the moon, right? Its pull on the tides, its pull on the breath, its pull on the cycle of doing that we go through month after month after month. A water witch is one who really fully understands that everything is in process, right? There is no static, unchanging thing. If you give yourself enough space, enough time, you see that all things are in process. They're fluid, shifting, changing. A water witch is always moving towards center, just like water, right? So you might feel that as that pull to go deeper all the time, right? That call towards the inner self, towards maybe shutting down the senses a bit and pulling inward to see what's happening inside versus all of that external noise. And as you know, water moves through endless surrender. And that surrender is what allows it to cut through earth, to cut through stone, to carve its path, always, always inching its way towards the center of the earth, even if it never actually makes it, right? It's always turning itself to go deeper. A water witch is one who not only sources her power from water, but perhaps finds ritual in it as well, right? Through sacred bath, through finding connection to rainstorm, maybe ocean, lake, river is your happy place, or a place where you feel calmest or most reflective. Yeah. You might feel pulled towards animals of water, whales, dolphins, salmon. My favorite story of all time, when my son was little, like probably 3, and he was at preschool. And I don't even remember how this came up now, but he was at preschool and his teacher texted me because we were sort of friendly. And she said, Asa just said that his spirit animal is a whale shark. And jaw on the ground. That's not like a conversation we had. Like, honey, what's your spirit animal? That is not a conversation we had. I don't walk around talking about my spirit animal. I mean, I must have at some point. How else would he know that word? But yeah, and he's stuck with it. He's almost 10 now. And like, if you ask, he's like, oh, I have a deep connection to whale sharks. Okay. Right. So you might have a connection. They might show up in your dream. They might offer some hint of wisdom or guidance for you. And I think, perhaps most importantly, for a water witch, being adaptable, being fluid in change is one of your superpowers. Yeah. And I want to take a moment to also bring in the swamp witch or bog witch, which is different, right? This is a different archetype, but it came up last week and it's so appropriate. Last week, we talked about the earth witch, this week, the water witch. And of course, the swamp witch or the bog witch lives right in between those two spaces, right? In that liminal edge. Yeah. And you remember maybe from the Edge series that we did a couple months ago now, that edges are not just an in between space. They are their own unique ecosystem. They are a third space. And particularly, they are a space that is ripe and wild with life. Those edge spaces are the spaces where evolution happens, where change happens, where growth happens. The swamp witch is typically one who despises conforming. The swamp witch is one who probably feels a bit out of place in society or with societal norms. The swamp witch is one who really wants to embody the wildness of self and the wildness of the spaces that are available to us. And of course, a swamp witch is quite at home with a bit of mud, right? So the oh so familiar phrase, no mud, no lotus, that rings very true for a swamp witch. And I wonder, I don't know that this is true, but I wonder if as we've gone through this series, there have been bits and pieces of every single archetype we've talked about that you're like, oh, yeah, I feel that. Or I have felt that before. Or maybe that's me. I'm not sure. And I just want to take a moment to identify that when we're talking about archetypes, you don't have to pick and choose which is you. You can. There are some moments where one archetype will be super strong and true for you. And so you might say, oh, that's me. But there are many times when there are so many facets to our archetypal existence that are true in the same moment. You don't have to pick which witch you are. You can be all of them. You might be like, actually, none of those archetypes resonate with me. You know what resonates with me is the archetype of mother, maiden, crone. Great. Different words, same stories, right? What we are talking about in this series is how do we find the places, the spaces, the practices that help us source our own power. that help us fill ourselves up, nourish ourselves, care for ourselves and our communities so that we can keep going with as much wellness as possible. That's what this series is about. And if it's fun, like it's fun for me. I love witch imagery. And so it's fun and I love to play with this. And if it's not yours, that's okay too. But I would encourage you to think, what are the archetypes? What are the myths that feel interesting, that tug on a piece of you inside somewhere and say, like, this, pay attention to this. Because you don't have to go light a candle and do a dance under the moon if that's not the thing that fills you up. But if it does, then do that thing, right? We have to do the practices that support us, all of them. And so we've done a kitchen witch meditation for those of you that feel cozy and nourished around the table or the hearth. And we've done a forest one for those that want to be surrounded by ancient trees. And of course, today we're going to do a water one. We're going to do an ocean one. And as I was prepping for the class today, I kept thinking about an episode I actually just released. Well, for the live class, I just released it very recently. And for those of you listening on the podcast, it will have come out about a month ago. But I released an interview that I did with Gordon Hempton and Perry Lynch Howard. It was titled Hear Me Out. And that interview was about a audio piece that they created together in Canaveral National Seashore down in Florida. And as you know, I think I went down there. I got to be with them for a little bit and I got to talk to them about their experience down there. And then they sent me this finished piece. And what is so compelling to me about this piece is that it was not at all what I was expecting, because I know both of them and have loved getting to work with them. And I, as you know, use their soundscapes all of the time. And that's what I was expecting, was a beautiful soundscape, right? A nature recording. And what they did was, yes, it was a nature recording, but they also took where they were staying in Canaveral National Seashore. They were staying in the house of an artist named Doris Lieber, who was like the person responsible basically for founding Canaveral National Seashore and protecting that land. And she lived by herself, like a true swamp witch would, on this like mangrovey, foresty, oceany coastline space. And so they stayed in her house while they were down there recording. And what they shared was they could just feel her presence the whole time. And the piece they ended up creating, they took just singular words from interviews that this woman had recorded over the span of a lifetime. And they cut those words up and they wove them into the ocean waves. And when you listen to the piece, and I hope you'll go back to that episode and listen to it. When you listen to the piece, it like starts out with sort of evening cricket bird sounds, and then waves come in. And then you have this moment where you're like, did I just hear a voice? No, I couldn't have heard a voice. No, I definitely just heard a voice. And it takes you a little bit of time to realize that you are hearing words in the water. And my experience of having that, not expecting it, not knowing it was coming and hearing it, I immediately was like, oh, how are my words woven into the landscape around me? Right. And this is the invitation I want to posit for us as we listen to the ocean tonight, is how are you woven into that ocean? I'll give just one last example before we practice this evening. In Sri Vidya, which is, I guess it's fair to say, a bit of a precursor to Tantra. In Sri Vidya philosophy, there is often a story told about individuating ourselves as souls or as egos, And in that story, the visual, the imagery that is used is that of an ocean wave, like cresting, rising up, and all the little droplets of water at the top of the wave sort of get sprinkled up into the air for a moment. And that moment when the droplets get shot up into the air, this is the moment of each of us going, I'm an I, I'm a self, I'm a me, and you're a you. We're different. I have my own body and my own shape and my own thoughts and feelings. But the story is just reminding us that we're all just dropping back into the same ocean that we came out of, right? It's really a story of remembering our connectedness, our oneness. And if you're a water witch, that story, you're like, yeah, I feel that. I am a drop in the ocean. And tonight, maybe we'll merge a bit back into that ocean together. Yeah. So let's get ourselves cozy so that we can practice. Take a moment just to let yourself settle. Move around if you need to. You can wiggle out your legs. You could cross them or uncross them. You could lie back a bit if you need to. And whenever you feel ready, you'll let your hands rest on your lap. You might let your eyes close. Or maybe you'll just choose to take a soft gaze down towards the ground. And together as a group here, we're going to take a nice deep inhale in. Exhale out a sigh. And we'll just do that once more. Inhaling deeply. Exhaling out a sigh. And allowing your breath just to flow. And as we settle into these first breaths, let's just silently say to ourselves, now is my time to meditate. Now is my time to meditate. And as you say those words, you know that it means this is your time to be here. This is your time to let go of all those things that have already happened today. And even if it's just for a moment, we're going to let go of all the things that we need to do later. And instead, we're going to let ourselves just sit down. See if you can feel an internal sense of letting go. Totally surrendering your body to this moment. And you feel yourself get a little heavier on the chair. You might be able to feel your thighs or your hips relax. Maybe you can let go of muscles in the belly. Softening the muscles through the chest. Relaxing your shoulders. Letting go along your jaw, the inside of the cheeks, softening the skin across the forehead and behind the forehead. And taking a moment to simply feel the ease with which you hold your body right now. And you might slowly start to become aware of the movement of your breath. The way the breath washes into the body. The way the breath washes out of the body. And there's nothing for you to do here. There's nothing you need to change or fix. You're simply allowing the breath to flow into you. To flow out of you. And over time, without any effort, you might find that you start to melt into the rhythm of the waves that you hear. With every breath, with every sweep of water. Perhaps you feel yourself sinking a little deeper inside. Remembering that the journey water takes is one that comes through surrender. Our work as water witches is to let ourselves go into the flow. You don't have to try too hard. You don't have to fight with yourself. You simply feel a breath and let it go. And feel a breath and let it go. When thoughts make themselves known, you simply notice the thought and let it go. Notice the thought and let it go. And as we settle into a period of silence here, perhaps you'll find yourself simply melting into the waves themselves. Feeling the wave of your breath. And taking time to gradually let that breath begin to deepen. Allowing it to draw your awareness towards the edges of the body. You might wiggle your fingers, your toes. Taking time to deepen that breath more, you might straighten your spine or roll your shoulders back and down. And together, as you feel ready, we'll take a deep breath in. Opening up the mouth, releasing a little sigh. And taking all the time you need to slowly let go of your practice, to blink your eyes open once again. Thank you, guys. Thanks for listening to Our Mindful Nature. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving me a review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps others to find this show, and let's face it, we could all use a few more meditators in our lives. Our Mindful Nature is recorded on Muskogee land and produced with the support of Brianna Nielsen. Deep gratitude is offered to acoustic ecologists Gordon Hempton and Nick McMahan for the use of their nature field recordings in many of these episodes. To join my live classes, ask questions, or learn about my teacher trainings, please visit merylarnett.com. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next week.